Hi, good evening, everybody. Um, my name is Anna, and I'm one of leadership and mentoring um, of the Sorry, I think that was a bit of background. Um, Hi, everybody. My name is Leah, and I'm one of the leadership mentoring and part of the leadership and mentoring program. I'm actually one of the mentees, and before we uh, proceed to our speaker for this evening, we would like to talk a little bit about our group. So, so as you can see briefly, we are made up of mentees and mentors from across the world. Our esteemed mentors include Prof. Ng Guan Hong, who's with us, Prof. Eva Beza, Robert Gerard, and Prof. Thomas Kron, to name a few. We also have mentees, and our mentees span from Malaysia to Peru, Cambodia, Hong Kong, and Vietnam, Brazil, and Taiwan as well. So we are an ever-growing group. We do quite a few activities, especially in terms of building leadership skills amongst our fellow mentees, and also helping one another also in the medical physics leadership program in general globally. So we are very excited today to have our speaker. Um, I'll just stop my share. So today with us we have Dr. Yao Hua. He's a science and environment journalist in Malaysia. He was an ecologist, insect ecologist, but left the academia in 2014 for a career in journalism. Since then, he has been reporting for international magazines and co-founded an environmental journalism portal, Makaranga, in 2019. His stories on issues like deforestation in Malaysia, snake bite in Indonesia, and asbestos associated disease have won international and national awards. He also frequently speaks on radio and runs journalism workshops as well. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Lau to proceed with the talk today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Leah. You can hear me fine? You
Yes,
guys can
I
hear
can.
me? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot again for that introduction, and thank you very much to you guys, to your team, for the opportunity to share my bits of experience with using storytelling to do science communication. Frankly speaking, I haven't been doing like exactly science communication for probably 2 years now. But of course, with journalism, we do storytelling all the time, and some of the principles, of course, remain the same. Storytelling principles and storytelling practices remain the same, regardless whether for me when I was a scientist or now when I'm a journalist. So I would like to share that with you. All right, so let me. So what we're gonna do is I'm just going to, I guess, start sharing my slides, and I'll start lecturing for maybe about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions after that. All right, so let me share my screen. Give me a minute as I grab my screen. And now I can't find my Canva for some reason, but never mind. All right, you can see my screen now, right? I assume. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so today really is to share with you all some I guess some basics of using storytelling methods in our science when we do science. So I think I understand that many of you are in the biomedical field, or perhaps all of you are in the biomedical field. I assume some of you might be doctors, but perhaps most of you are scientists, and you might be wondering, why should I be telling stories? And perhaps you might be wondering, aren't all stories fictional? But what we are doing is non-fiction. We are fact-seeking, right? We are doing experiment, looking at data of trying to understand the real world. So why are we storytelling? Well, storytelling is basically just a technique, and the stories can be real stories. It can be non-fictional stories, which is what reporters do. So, story doesn't mean it's fictional, but rather it's sort of like a set of patterns of how to tell something of a narration. Yeah, and I'm going to share with you what it is and why you should really consider using storytelling approaches in doing your science communication, whoever you choose to speak with. So yeah, you can just call me Yao Hua or Yao for short. I'm here in Malaysia, and before I was a journalist, so as Leah said just now, I became a journalist sometime in 2014. But before that, for about 8 years before 2014, I was more or less an insect ecologist. So I was also a scientist. I still consider myself a scientist, but I was a practicing scientist. I was an active researcher and a lecturer. And my life was what you see here on your screen on the left side. Basically, I studied insects. I studied insect behavior, and much of my days was spent observing them, running experiments on them, of them, and my communication methods were really graphs and and scientific papers. Right, I go to conference and I report things. I don't really tell story mostly. I wouldn't think of myself as telling stories, but I picture myself giving a report, right, and sharing my findings in a report format. But it was mostly this. Although the things I was observing at the time were really, really interesting. And when I was not in a conference, when I wasn't presenting at the conference, when it's after the conference and we are sort of like, at the pub or just over coffee, and then we started chatting, then I start telling stories, and then it becomes easier and more chit chat sort of like format. And I know you do that too. But once we put on that mindset of presenting at the conference, or when we speak with a reporter, sometimes we slip back into that, oh, I must be so formal, I must get everything perfectly 100% right, and then I start talking jargon, right? That was sort of like my life before. Then my life now, once I've switched into a career as a journalist, is I do a lot more than just studying insects. I write about forests and deforestation a lot in the last few years. I also write about mining. So the company that I co-founded and run now is called Makaranga, and we only focus on the Malaysian environment. So and I have to do things like design social media posts like this cat that you see on the right. um, and I also, of course, used to write a lot about health. Do a lot of health journalism, so I write a lot about diseases, about pharmaceuticals, about how scientists, just new findings in medical sciences and health, right? So the hardest thing for me to learn or to pick up when I switch from it as a scientist to a journalist, the hardest thing was really this making things simpler. No, I remember when I first started as a journalist, as a reporter, and I was going to write a news story about basically when you guys, right, when you guys publish a paper, journalists like me would want to translate or transform that paper into a news story that anybody, hopefully anybody could read and would be interested to read. So I remember when I first did that, I was so obsessed with the statistics in the scientific papers because I had that training, right? And I was so obsessed with it. I was going through the paper like I would as a scientist rather as a journalist. And then, of course, then that meant I also struggled to write it in a story format that my mom would enjoy reading, or would even be able to go past like the first two paragraphs, right? I imagine that would be also the one of the main challenges for you, when you speak with the public, or when you speak with anybody who is not within your lab, in very lay person terms, interesting terms, to connect with them. You know that your stuff is very interesting, and of course all the stuff that we study is interesting, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. But how do you then transform that interest that you have, that passion that you have, pack that with the knowledge that's contained, from your findings, in your findings, and then pass it, convey it, to our readers, or to whoever audience that you want. That's the challenge, and storytelling can help with that, right? So, um, what the challenges that we face, when we come to presenting our science, with the general audience, is usually these are the two main challenges that we will first encounter generally. So the first is that the audience just seem to find our work boring, or they will be like, why are you studying insects? I think I mine was kind of cool. I studied why insects cannibalize each other, why the insect mother would eat her own eggs. It's sort of a behavior switch, and I could turn on that behavior using a certain environment. Wow, because I studied cannibalism, people would like, oh, okay, wow, that's cool. It's not something that they usually listen about, right? And so it is something cool. But still, people would ask me, like, why do you spend so much time in the cotton field looking at insects? It's just so beyond their world, their usual world, that they don't have the interest in there. They may listen to you for a minute because cannibalism is so weird, and so that hook them and it triggers their interest, it sparks their curiosity. But how are we able to hold that, right? So that lack of interest is very real. It's a real challenge. um, or that they might be interested and then they get desensitized, right? Like with the pandemic, at the start, everyone was very interested. Everyone had a stake in it, but as we get wham left and right with stories and news and data about the pandemic, we get desensitized. We are tired, and so then we lose interest. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that the content is just too difficult for the audience to understand. We understand it, like, of course, because you have spent like several years at least working on that, in that field, and you have read so many review papers. You perhaps have written a few review papers on your own, so of course you know that, and it's second nature to you already. But to everyone else out there, it is jargon, it is too technical, it takes too much effort to understand, and they cannot even relate it to anything that they are familiar with in their life. And so the communication breakdown, we are not able to inspire the same interests in our audience that we have, right? And we really struggle to understand why you're not interested in physics, why are you not interested in the other side of the moons, for example, or why are you not interested in, I don't know, whatever is it that you guys study. So actually, if you guys don't mind, as you listen to me, you guys can start typing in the YouTube chat, like what do you study? Like what do you study, or perhaps like some of the challenges you face when you communicate or when you want to share your science with a general audience, and then maybe we can get to that. So one way, like how do we solve this? One easiest way to solve this, one of the easiest way to solve, to spark interest or to cut through the technical jargon, for example, is if you have a really like uh triggering, mind-blowing visual or something, right? And it's just so out of this world that people can't help but just really like it's captivated. For example, like if you have this photo, you don't need to do much storytelling basically, because the photo itself will grab people's attention and people will have so many questions based on a photo like this. um it would be like, oh, because this is a static photo, but there's like a lot of action in there. There is this thing that looks like a monkey, a primate, and we think that primates will be eating fruits or small animals, small maybe lizards and insects. But hey, this fellow is like munching on the what looks like the head of what looks like a rodent, right? And that's just bizarre, right? So you if you have a photo like this, you have half of your work already done for you, right? So I guess one of the first one of the lessons that you need to remember is when you're doing your science and you're thinking about communicating your science, you have to think visually. You have to start taking photos, videos, like interesting images, right? Um, yeah, you have to collect those photos. Of course, not every photo will be like this, especially if you work in a lab. It might be even it might be very very difficult to get a photo like this, right? But there must be some interesting photos in your work, and so you have to collect those photos and make a story out of them. But of course, for most of us, we rarely come across such a photo. Yeah. So then, but even with such a photo, we still have to be able to tell a good story using the photo, leading from the photo. So, what exactly is a story? Now, a story is quite, the premise of a story is actually quite simple. It's when we tell a story, we are giving information. That information is the intellectual part, right? But in addition to that information, in addition to the intellectual trigger, the message, we also seek to uh, invoke an emotional experience in the audience, right? So that they don't just get the information that they understand, that they acquire some knowledge, but they also feel something. For example, if I tell you um, the water, this glass, if I tell you that this glass of water is 100 degrees Celsius, it is hot. If I just say that, right? You have some information, but you don't feel anything. Now, if I say, if I if I do a video, right? If I do a video and I actually pour the water on my hand and I go, this is so hot, it hurts, right? That is an emotional experience, and that emotional experience would work because you can relate to it. You have felt it. I mean, you have some experience being scalded in the past, so you understand how it feels. You know how it feels, and you feel it. And whatever data or whatever information that I tag along with that emotional experience that I convey to you, studies have showed that you will remember it much better. Okay, you remember much better. So a story aims to do two things: an intellectual experience and an emotional experience. That's what we would aim to do with a story. And why should we do that? I will argue that, I've thought of this for some time, and I would argue that many of the problems that we face in this world that we encounter is because either we are ignorant, or we know about it but we don't take any action about it. So either we did not know about it, which is ignorance, or we knew about it but somehow we don't act on it. So that's inaction. And well, I'm not sure about you as a scientist, but me as a journalist, I want people to act, um, you know, on their own, right, based on what they think is works best for them. And so the way to really one way to address these two issues of ignorance and inaction is to give them information, which is knowledge, that would fix their ignorance. The other is to trigger them into taking action, and that we need the emotion part. And so, and remember, I said that storytelling is to create an intellectual experience and an emotional experience. So that's two, right? And otherwise, we don't have to bother telling stories. We can just write simple bland reports or data without any story, without any narrative, and that will all be information. If that itself is sufficient to solve our problems, then we will have solved all our problems, right? But it hasn't. And the elements of a story is it basically needs to have the classical storytelling uh, theory would sort of have these elements in it. Basically, it needs to have a conflict and a resolution. And who has a conflict? The character has a conflict, right? There must be somebody in there. This character doesn't necessarily have to be a human, but it's easiest if it's human. It can be an animal if you are so uh, great at writing. It can be an animal. Many stories have been written from the point of view of animals. It can be a place, really, but the easiest if it's a human. So somebody does something, it encounters a problem, and wants to solve that problem, and then does something else to solve it, and then there's a resolution. Basically, this is it. If you think of every fairy tale, every folklore that you can remember now. Just think of one fairy tale. Now you now think of one fairy tale or one folklore. You think about it. You guys are from all over the world, so think of one folklore that you know and see whether it matches this template. That there are characters. The character wanted something, but then faced conflict, no, faced an obstacle. Somebody stopped them, or there's something bad happened and they couldn't do it. And so then this character reacted to the conflict, reacted to the obstacle, right? Because they want to get at something. And that's basically the whole story. And either the character changed or the circumstances has changed. In the end, it might not be a happily ever after ending, but something in the character has changed, and either the character got what they wanted, or they learned something about themselves. The character learned something about themselves, right? And they have accepted something. That's also resolution. I would bet that any of the stories that you can think of more or less fit into this template. And yeah, of course, it has a beginning, then something happened in the middle, and the end. The end doesn't have to be an absolute end, and it doesn't have to be a happily ever after. It's just the end to a series of events, and the character has learned something or has changed, and that's it. Now you might at this point you might think, oh, how does all this thing that Yao Hua is saying like fit into my science? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Yeah. So let's look at this sentence here. I want to talk about rampant logging. Somebody comes up to me and say, I want to talk about rampant logging, and they say this is their story. For you, you could be like, some of you are saying that um, medical physics. Um, I want to write a story about a medical physicist, for example. You might say that. I want to write a story about the life of a medical physicist. I want to write about the day in the life of a medical physicist. Now, is that a story? I would argue that it's not a story yet, um, because it's just a topic. It is not a story. It doesn't have the elements that we mentioned just now. I know that your character is most definitely a medical physicist, but what is his or her conflict? What happened? What did they do? And what did they solve? Right. So I'm just going to use the logging as an example. Instead of just saying that I want to talk about rampant logging, or I want to tell you about medical physicists, you would say something more fleshed out. For rampant logging, it would be this: that there are loggers who want to benefit from increasing demand for wood, but the local conservation laws stop them from logging. So what did they do? They tried and tried for many months to circumvent these laws. In the end, they managed to persuade the authority to issue logging permits, that let them log 2 forest reserve, and now they've already logged half of it. This would be a story. There are characters in here, the loggers, and then the chief minister. But the main character is the loggers. and they wanted something. They want to get the wood, right? Because they want to profit from selling the wood. But it's not it's not like cloud 9 for them. It's not like, a perfect life for them, because there are conservation laws that stop them from getting the wood. But they are also not they're not puppets, right? They don't just sit there. So then there's a conflict, there's an obstacle in front of them. Like all humans, they react to that and they try to get over it. So then they thought of ways to do it. So then they reach out to the chief minister, and then they got their way, and they've already logged half of the forest reserves. So this would be a story. There's action, there's events, there are characters, there are conflict, and there is a somewhat of a resolution for the loggers. At least they've already got the wood that they want. I'm not saying that this is I'm not this is a story. Technically, this would be a story. And if somebody tells me this story, I will remember it much, much better than if they just tell me there are how many loggers, how much wood was logged, and it was logged because the chief minister allowed it. If you tell me this, I will remember it much better. And I will have different feelings as I read this. If I'm a very pro conservation person, I would feel angry that this happened. If I was one of the person who thought that, yeah, of course, we should definitely make use of increasing demand for wood, and the forest can grow back, why not we cut it now? Then perhaps I would feel happier that the loggers were able to find their way around it, right? So, yeah. So there would be an emotional experience from this. Now, so that is just an example of how to go from a topic to a story. Sometimes the issues can be very complex, and and you can struggle to really think of how do I find the story in this. Some years ago, actually about two years ago, 2.5 years ago, I wrote this story on aging in insects for Science magazine. It's actually quite technical. The science is quite complex. The modeling is quite complex. The theory itself can be quite complex. A lot of mathematics and stuff. I of course found it fascinating because I study insects, but I really thought for a long time, how do I make this an interesting story for the general readers, right? And um, many of the scientists who spoke with me were very passionate about their work. So I definitely got their passion, and they explained their science very well. And it come to me then, now I think I interviewed like at least 7, 8 labs, or I think likely 10 labs. And I have to bring all their things together and make it into a cohesive story. And so that, somebody like my wife and my mom could read it and would like it. Of course, the easy way is to talk about aging, right? Of course, everyone cares about aging. Everyone ages. So if I'm telling you now that, oh, the insects have the secret to stop aging, that should be a good enough trigger, a good enough hook, a good enough engagement to trigger people's curiosity. However, that's not the story. That's not the story. And I can't write it that way, because that would be making it a lot more sensational than it actually is. But in there, I'm not going to tell you what the story is. You'll have to read it. No, there's a QR code there. You can just scan it right now, and go save the story for reading later. But there's this idea that in the colony, every ant is more or less the same. You can have ants that are exactly the same. They're clones of each other. The whole colony is the same. Genetically, they're all the same. But just because one individual switches into reproducing babies, then that individual lives 3 times or 4 times longer. But they're all the same genetically. Just because one began to lay babies or lay eggs, that individual then live 3 or 4 times longer. I found that fascinating. I found that very curious. Why would that happen? And we tend to think that giving birth is a very taxing thing, and we should actually die earlier, or we should wear out faster if we give birth to more babies. But in the whole colony, the queen actually lives the longest. So I sort of use this kind of contrast, this curiosity, this surprising thing, to lead the story. right? So that is what you can definitely do too. So when you are telling a story, don't just look for the characters and the actions and conflict, but look for the surprising element in them, and use that surprise element to your benefit when you tell the story. This is another story that I wrote, also a very long story. This was, I think, more than 4,000 words. This was not a difficult story to write for me because there were many characters in this story. There were many, it was a very emotional, triggering story because there were deaths, there were people being hurt, it was just a lot of very touching stories put into one. Um, and the way I did this was actually, this is a story that I would suggest is quite worth reading for you to see how you can use scenes and characters to you use a scene, you use a character doing something. It's a mini story in itself, and then in between you slip in your data and your information, and people would sit and listen because they have already been so engaged with the story. They are willing to listen to you blabber out some data, some slightly boring stuff, and of course that has to relate to the story, and they'll sit through the whole thing. This story was quite successful in that the way I wrote it, apparently, I mean, this all came to me after I published the story, and people were telling me that it was touching enough that it touched some very high level senior level people in the management, and it eventually led to the Indonesian government uh, starting a national venom research center to tackle their snake bite problem. Yeah, and it was just in a matter of 6 months, a few months after we published this story. So it could work. It could work, and this was a problem that had plagued them for like 10 years, 15 years or something. Yeah. Um. Another example that I'd like to share with you is the one on top. If you go read, like if you scan that QR code, and you look up for the work of Steven Strogatz, he's a mathematician, if I remember correctly. And he writes really, really well, very clear, very engaging prose. If you read how he presents his stuff, I mean, mathematics and physics are some of the most complex topics that I don't dare to tackle. So I will assume that if somebody can write it so well, there's a lot to learn from how they tell the story. So I would suggest you look at that. On Twitter, there's this account called the Cultural Tutor. Also present the story in a thread. I also thought that this person present the story very, very well. Things that I think typically people won't be bothered, like very historical stuff, very history stuff. But he used a lot of very nice visuals, and it's just Twitter. It's Twitter, right? So every post is limited word count, but he does it very well. He or she does it very well. So definitely have a look at that. Okay, now back more to work in the lab. There's this account on Instagram that I really, really love. It's called Jam and Germs. This is the QR code for this Instagram account. Um, this person, I think it's a guy. He just takes videos of this microorganisms or this nematodes and or yeah, this single cell microbes, I guess. I would say single cell animals, single cell life forms, and um, and he writes about it, and I think the way he writes about it is really interesting, and it makes me always want to. The video itself is definitely interesting. That goes without saying. The videos of this organisms, behaving and doing their stuff. But then the what he write is also just as interesting. So there's also a lot that we can learn from these people. So this, I think this is one of my last slide already. So back to the original challenge that I mentioned. When we present our science, very typically we have these two issues. So the way to deal with it is to tell it as a story. But as we tell the story, remember that if we can use elements of surprises, elements of emotions like real people's story, that all works very great. In addition to that, also try to remember that we have to make it relevant to the audience that we are speaking with. And that this is actually very important. You really got to know who you're speaking with, right? I'm speaking to you scientists, so I try to use a lot more like science kind of stuff. If I'm speaking with conservation NGOs, I use a totally different set of terms, right? So I have to make it relevant to the people I am presenting to. Relevant means it is something that they can understand or uh, relate to or picture in their own lives. If I'm talking to, say, for example, the food and beverage industry, chefs, I will definitely use elements in the kitchen, in the restaurant. I would use ingredients, food ingredients, and all that, right? Perhaps I might even start do my whole storytelling using a menu. And that would be totally different if I'm speaking with uh, so every few weeks I will enter I every few weeks I would give lectures in a prison here in Malaysia. That's then there's a whole different set of environment, and I have to make everything that I say relevant to them. So that is actually your homework, right? um That being said, there are some themes that are universal, that are so high level and they're universal, and it doesn't matter really it's whether it's a chef, whether it's a prison convict, whether it's a journalist, or whether it's an insect ecologist who's listening. Such universal themes, for example, like the loss of a loved one, that's universal. It doesn't matter what job you do, you understand that, you feel that. The joy of the hard work that you put in, finally you have some success. The joy of success, everyone feels that, everyone understands that. So there are also some universal themes that you can tap into. And for the one or for the issue that the content is just so technical, and you can't you can't tackle it, my advice to you is simply to keep it simple. I always argue that if we are not able to explain something simpler and simpler and simpler, and get at the real gist, the real essence of it, then I will argue that we don't understand that thing well enough. If we don't understand its core fundamental enough. Yeah, so usually it's actually our trouble if we are not able to explain it in simpler terms, in less technical terms. I think it is actually our problem and not the audience problem. You can be smart and use analogy, right? Again, the analogy that you use has to be relevant to the audience, right? If I'm speaking to kindergarten kids, there's kind of no point if I use an analogy of quantum physics. They won't get it, right? I have to use analogy, maybe the cartoons that they've been watching, or the things that their mom would tell them. Yeah, that would be the right way to do it. Okay, the last exercise I'd like to give you guys, try doing it, is yeah, we have to try to write things like a movie, right? If you have, even if you're presenting as verbally, you have to write a script, right? You have to sort of like mentally, at least you have to write a script. That you have to try to do it like a movie. Movie means, again, it's a story. There are actions, there are characters, right? You can zoom in, zoom out. Don't just stay at one zoom, right? You have to pan it and you have to move, right? Then there is fluid, there is movement, and thus it's a movie, and that will keep people engaged, and it makes it interesting. I will give you. You can take any example. I know nothing about the field of medical physicists. What you do really, but I assume that blood clotting. Every medical student would know this. Cytokine storm is slightly more complicated. Just say blood clotting. Now, can you try to write the process of blood clotting like a movie? Put in characters in there, put in conflict, put in actions and events. Yeah, blood clotting. It's very simple, right? Yeah, blood clotting. Try to do it. In fact, I'm going to give you maybe a minute now. Yeah. You can write it in the YouTube chat if you want, or you can just write it on your own. Um, yeah, but try writing it. Think about it. I'm gonna stop talking for 1 minute and give you the time. Okay, I think you have 15 seconds left. All right. I see that our friend Impactful Research, what a cool name, shared a quote from Ernest Rutherford. Well, that's true. If a piece of physics cannot be explained to a barmaid or just generally any person who doesn't really have not studied physics, right, then it is not a good piece of physics. Yeah, I guess so. Or not a good piece of person. Not well. I would say it's not the physics fault. It's more like the person who is not explaining it well. Yeah, but it should be so simple that it can be explained to a barmaid in the terms that she is really familiar with. And because physics arguably would be very easy to do that because it is the study, it's a science of like natural laws, right? And so anything can be related to physical laws, of course. Right. Okay. Leia. Okay, so somebody in linguistics. Okay, so Leia gave us an example on blood clotting. It began with a platelet traversing through the veins of a human. The platelet stops and finds his friends hanging out at the spot. They stuck together and save the life of the human. Very good, very good example. There's action there, and you're writing the platelet as a character doing things. That's awesome. And you can visualize it, right? The moment I start reading it, it began with a platelet, traversing through the veins of a human. He stops and finds his friend hanging out at the spot. They stuck together and saved the life of the human. Is there anything technically wrong there? I guess you can argue that they are not exactly his friends, and he is not he right. It's not a male, right? You can argue those, but in the bigger picture of storytelling, the science, and getting our audience to understand and remember it, I would argue that those minor those are minor. Those mistakes or wrong are minor. Uh, Naziha Mumin said, the body has a squad of little heroes called platelets. When there's a cut, they come out on a mission to save the day, sealing off the cut, and these little heroes save the day. Good attempt. Very good. So again, saving the day, they wanted to do something. And what do they want to do? They want to seal the cut. Good. So you guys already get it. Um, I'm going to show you an example I wrote 7 years ago. It's going to be a wall of text that you see, but I'm basically explaining what happens when a strand of asbestos fiber land find its way into our lung, right? And the whole reaction that it triggers. You take some time to read this, yeah. Okay. Um, so you could see how when I wrote this, um, there is a lot of there are many verbs. There are always something doing something. There's always something doing something, right? There's always action. In every almost every sentence, I think there are action. Very few is. It's always a verb, and I wanted to put everything into action, so that I can explain this whole cytokine storm, this whole immunological overreaction, and how it could sometimes lead to cancer in it. Now, 7 years later, as I read this, I find things that I can actually improve. Um, like for example, free radicals. Like who will understand what free radicals is? Somebody without who hasn't really studied biology or forgot about biology and hasn't really done much of a biochemical, they probably won't know what radical is. So I could do a better job explaining that, right? But I'm showing this just as an example of how we can present or talk about our science like one would do a movie. Yeah, just plenty of action, moving in and out, uh, and still keeping it technically correct. Yeah, technically correct. I have this. I wrote this, and then after I published it, I sent it to the experts, right, who really work on this, and they say it's correct. No, it's nothing wrong with it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. If you wish to contact me, this is my email here, and you can find me on Twitter at just Yao Hua Law. Let's see if you guys have questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Actually, I do not know how to stop sharing my screen. Yeah, I think I can stop sharing screen here.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. I think thank you very much for the refreshing presentation. Uh, I think it's a very difficult struggle in general for any scientist, right? I believe it's from writer's block to conveying ideas. It's quite the struggle actually. So I think breaking it down made it very useful, and I think impactful journalism quite um, in terms of like scientific journalism and conveying very technical and difficult um, um, notions, but breaking it down like is it was very beautifully put, like in my opinion, the way the way
Thank you.
um, I think so. I do apologize. I have my fellow co-host with me, Tendai, and she will be facilitating with our questions for the evening, which will be on
Sure.
the chat. So, to everyone who's been watching, I hope that you have some questions um, to ask Dr. Lau. I think I'll start with the ball rolling a little bit. How I guess my question would be how, because most of our physicists and anyone joining today, I guess I could safely say most of us are somewhat bilingual, or and so they say when you speak a different language, it's like the rules of the game are different for each language and things like that, especially the way you convey ideas. How do you have any personal experience of either writing in any, whether English or Malay, I assume since you're Malaysian, how what are the challenges and how do you overcome those, especially for
Right.
non-native or non-native to that language?
So for me, I have almost always written in English, but I present in many different languages. I find the only thing to really it's actually quite fun. Um, the technical jargon aside, because in languages that is not English, many of the technical terms can be actually very difficult to translate. Like to translate it into Malay can be very difficult. And for me, I'm ethnically Chinese. To read the same terms in Chinese, for me, it is a struggle. I was like, why is it like this? But it just reads so naturally in English. So the technical terms aside, The technical terms, you just have to go look for the terms. There's no other way around it. The technical terms aside, the way of presenting or storytelling, if it's a different language, then I would actually use the terms or the slang of that language. So that's how I do it. But when I present in a different language, it's almost always verbal. So I will speak on Chinese radio, on well, Chinese radio, and sometimes I present in Malay, not often but sometimes. So I would use that slang. I would use that kind of intonation, and that's about it. Otherwise, in terms of the presentation and the storytelling, I don't think it differs by the language. Yeah, I don't think so. At least not in my experience. Yeah,
Thanks. I think that's
yeah.
yeah, like it's quite difficult. So you've broken it down. I didn't think about it that way, where you can use the colloquial way of saying it in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
language.
it's more important to know the audience than the language. So we always fit it. We always try our best to fit the content and the delivery to the audience. I think the language. Yeah, I think for the language, for most of us, it's just a struggle. Even if it's our first language, we just struggle to even write, and we feel very insecure about it. So you just have to get over that insecurity and make fun of yourself. I always make fun of myself. Nothing wrong. Don't wait for people to make fun of you. You make fun of yourself first. You take that away from them.
True.
Yeah. Mhm. I think there's some questions on the chat. I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Law. We have Preacher on Earth. He or she is asking, saying, how important are technical numbers in storytelling? How to present them? And do you use analogy too? And when you started presenting, you told us that when you looked at some of the publications, you saw that there were quantities, numbers, and all that. That's why you had to do away with those. Does that mean that when you start doing storytelling, you have to do away with numbers,
No,
considering
not at
also that?
all. Yeah, sorry. Thanks for that, Tenda. Sorry, I cut you off there. Sorry. um,
Okay.
no, it's not at all that you have to do away with the numbers. I think is it Snow White? There are seven dwarfs, right? Seven matters, and so they say the word seven. Um, suddenly I can't remember any other fairy tale that has numbers, but there are. The only thing is you have to ask yourself, how important is the number? And if the number is important, is integral, it's to the whole understanding and to the whole message, then definitely say the number. But even when we do present the number and we put it into our story, it doesn't have to be 56.39, right? Unless that 0.39 is the story. Otherwise, there's no point of saying 56.39. You can just say 56, about 56, right? Everyone's okay, whatever. So about 56, and that's it. It doesn't have to say 0.39 if it doesn't matter, unless the 39 is the story. And using analogy for numbers, it's a very good point. Or making it relevant. I will always say like, oh, Peninsular Malaysia in the last 20 years has lost, according to the government, we have lost 133,000 hectares of forest in the last 20 years. I know how big that is. I'm sure none of you has any idea how large 133,000 hectares is. So, but to me, that number is very important. It's the whole point of me telling that, right? Telling you this. So I just have to make it relevant to you. A few months ago, I presented this data to this finding to a group of Australian students from somewhere in Perth. I hope they're not listening. I hope I didn't get it wrong. Anyway, I think they were from Perth, Australia. So what did I do? I looked up where their school is. There happened to be a lake just next to their school. And by chance, the area of the lake is 13,000 hectares. So all I needed to tell them was we cut forest, 133,000 hectares. That is 10 times the size of the lake next to your school. That's it. That's all you need to do. Make it relevant to them. Don't hide the numbers away if the numbers are important. But if they are not important, then you don't have to say. Yeah. 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 I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Back to you, Leah.
Leah, we can't hear you.
Sorry, thanks. I think there's one more question about, but I didn't quite understand the statement. I'm so sorry. It says like Dr. Lau, very good talk, comma, Chinese question mark.
Perhaps asking whether I'm ethnically Chinese. Yes, I'm ethnically Chinese. Yeah. Yeah, I do present in Chinese too. Because I write only in English, so I don't have any Chinese readers. So then I go on radio to talk about it. There's a question on what motivated me to switch from science to journalism, or from being a scientist to a journalist. Long story short, long story short, I to do research is not my first love. To teach is my first passion. Is my first love. And at some point in my career, I realized that I could teach in many ways, not just in the lecture hall and not just in a classroom. I could teach also by through writing. And given the other obstacles I had at the time, I decided to switch career, and I just went into journalism. And it's been really really fulfilling, a lot more broader, not just looking at insects all day is actually very very fun. I love to do it, but now I also get to look at many other different things. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Low, would you say that journalism is another way of teaching, like unlike the traditional way of teaching? So
Yes.
basically,
Yeah.
when you say you didn't move from teaching, you're still
Mhm.
teaching.
Yes, definitely. Except that, yes, journalism is to me is definitely teaching. Because we are at the very least we are uh repackaging uh information for the general people's consumption. So that's the very least that we would do. Sometimes we discover new things, and that's even better. The thing though, the disadvantage about teaching through journalism is that, unlike in a classroom, I do not, when I write and I publish, I do not know how my readers react. I do not know if it hit them on the head, or if they are just sleeping through and they find it boring, or they don't understand it. I don't get that. I don't get that instant reaction. Whereas in a classroom, and I hope most of you are teaching, because it's great. You get that instant reaction. You know whether your student or your audience is listening, or they understand, or they are feeling happy. When you say a joke, they are laughing. When I write a joke in my thing, I have no idea if the reader is laughing or not. So that actually, when it comes to storytelling, writing is actually quite difficult. It is quite difficult. But when we are presenting verbally and when there's a live audience, storytelling is great. And you have to learn to react to them, and to remember, all these storytelling methods. And if it's not hitting them, if they're not reacting, that means whatever you are saying is really not really relevant to them, or it's not simple enough. Then hopefully you get to a point where you can on the spot change your content and make it relevant to them. Eventually you guys will get there. Just know that, yeah, storytelling it works, and there's so many books and free resources out there to teach storytelling. Yeah. I'll just take this last question, Tendai, if you don't mind. I'll just read it. I think there's one last. I'll just do it because I think we are running out of time.
Okay.
This is a question from Impactful Research. What advice would I give to scientists and doctors who want to communicate their research findings with the public? My simplest advice is my most basic one is just do it. Yeah, you don't have to really like wait for anything. And there are so many platforms to do it. I've seen my friends who are scientists do it very well on social media. Some of them do it very well on radio. Some of them write blogs. um, some of them write columns in newspapers. Whatever it is that really you are happy to do, you can try doing it. Like social media is like so easy. Everyone has a platform. You can start just talking about the science that you do, or you can talk about the science that you do. You can talk about the science that impresses you, that you like, right? And you can always start small. For example, Impactful Research shared that quote by Ernest Rutherford. What did Ernest Rutherford do, right? Maybe you can just start writing, a post a week about what Rutherford did. um yeah, just find some visual. If it's Instagram, then you probably need a visual, and Canva is free. There's so many free resources out there that we can use. I would say just do it. Keep the message simple. Experiment with different ways of doing it. um, and then get feedback. Ask around. Hey, is this effective? Is this funny? If you want it to be funny, is this funny? Does this grab your attention? um, do you understand it? What do you remember from it? Then I guess the second piece of advice is, you guys already know it. The second piece of advice is basically just be humble, and be willing to accept rejection and learn. But to accept rejection is, you guys all accept rejection all the time with your papers anyway. So with your submissions, so you guys know that very well. And that's it. Yeah, just do it. Start simple, get feedback, learn and improve. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lau, for the wonderful presentation, and also thank you to all the audience members for posting your questions. So, as mentioned, Tenda and I are both mentees, so you're more than welcome if you're interested to join our group and contribute. We're more than happy to help you. And if you're interested in our content, we have weekly, sorry, not weekly, but about monthly um, content. Let me just share that really quickly. So you can check us out on our Instagram page. We post all of our upcoming um, talks here. You can also see our previous ones if you'd like to on our YouTube page. So our YouTube page, currently we're live, and we also have talks from previous speakers as well in the past. Yes. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining today. And we're very happy to have all of you. And thank you so much again, Dr. Lau, for breaking down how it is to tell a story in terms of like putting our thoughts out there in the most coherent but also the most passionate manner. And I think it
Thank you.
was yeah, it was very well done. Thank you so much. And we will check out Makaranga as well.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And hope